And good morning, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Jeremy Drucker, and I'm with Minnesotans for Clean Cars. Minnesotans for Clean Cars is a coalition of Minnesota-based organizations that believe adopting clean car standards in our state is a smart solution to reducing climate pollution, is consumer-friendly, and will benefit Minnesotans' bottom line. To start off today, we'll do a short presentation, a short review of what clean car standards are, and then we'll turn over to our panel to discuss why it's important. So what is Clean Cars Minnesota? In an effort to adopt greenhouse gas and other air pollution emission standards for passenger cars and light duty trucks via rulemaking led by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency as directed by Governor Tim Walz, these are called Clean Car Standards. So what are they? There's two parts to the Clean Car Standards. One is the low emission vehicle standard, the LEV standard. The other is a zero emission vehicle standard, or the ZEV standard. Lower emission vehicle standard focuses on tailpipe emissions. So these would require manufacturers to deliver vehicles for sale in Minnesota that meet more stringent greenhouse gas and other air pollutant emission standards. The ZEV standard focuses on technology, and these are primarily electric vehicles and would require manufacturers to deliver more vehicles with ultra low or zero tailpipe emissions. These are essentially electric vehicles. So things like the Nissan Leafs or the Chevy Bolts, vehicles like those. There's been a lot of misinformation out there about what clean car standards actually are. And so we'll do a quick fact check on sort of what they do and what they don't do. So what do they do? So what it does is it applies to light duty vehicles. So these are cars and trucks that are on the road. It does not apply to big rigs or farming equipment or mining equipment or anything like that. It does apply to only new vehicle sales. So it doesn't apply to vehicles that are already on the road. So if you've got a car now, they won't be governed under the new standards. What it does is that it's estimated that it'll increase the amount of new vehicle sales in Minnesota that are electric vehicles by just under 8%. So it doesn't make everyone buy an EV. Consumers will still be able to buy whatever car suits their needs. But what it will do is it will increase Minnesota consumers' choice. Right now, Minnesotans don't have access to all of the electric vehicle models that are out there because a lot of manufacturers aren't delivering them to Minnesota because we don't have these stricter standards. And there's also this rumor out there that this will somehow cede authority to the state of California. That's not what's going to happen. Minnesota will always be able to kind of negotiate and decide what part of the standards it wants to be a part of and what part it won't be. So why Clean Cars Minnesota? Why are we doing this? Clean Cars gives Minnesota a choice. Between two emission standards, the Clean Car Standards and the federal emission standards. What Clean Cars do is that it's going to, and our panelists will delve into this a little more, but this isn't happening in a vacuum. It's happening at a time of immense economic disruption amidst a health crisis never before seen. It's also at a time when automakers are getting ready for an electric vehicle future, and when XL has a goal of 1.5 million EVs on the road by 2030. And it's also when the federal administration is rolling back its own emission standards and other air pollution controls. All these forces make it imperative that Minnesota takes control of the future it wants and takes action now. And to talk a little more about this, I want to hand it over to our panelists. And we'll start with Bree Halverson from the BlueGreen Alliance. Bree?
Hi, I'm Bree Halverson. I'm the Minnesota Program Manager from the BlueGreen Alliance. So we were started here in Minnesota, but we do have a presence in multiple states. We were started by the United Steelworkers and Sierra Club and have grown to have many other environmental organizations and unions belong to the BlueGreen Alliance. And we exist primarily because we believe that it is a false choice, that we have to either have good jobs or a clean environment. We believe we can have both. And part of the reason why BlueGreen Alliance is looking into or participating with Clean Cars is we believe this is an opportunity to live out that mission. That we can have good manufacturing jobs out of clean cars. So, this is right in line of like things that we normally work on. So, I'm excited to be part of this discussion today.
Great, thanks, Bree. Anna, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name's Anna Richey, and I am the Southern Minnesota Regional Manager for Conservation Minnesota. I live and am based out of Rochester, but I have all of basically what accounts or amounts to the first congressional district. I'm also a member, or have been on the city Rochester's Energy Commission for the past 6 years. So I've been working on guiding our local policy forward from a citizen's perspective, as well as working on sort of our broader portfolio through Conservation Minnesota's work. So the reason we are interested in this, obviously, is because vehicle emissions account for a lot of the greenhouse gases that we are trying desperately to combat with respect to climate change. And what I've learned going around Minnesota in general, but also especially down here in southern Minnesota, is that there is an appetite for it, but just not the supply that folks are looking for. So we are really enthusiastic about the Minnesotans for Clean Cars and all of this, because what people want is the option to be able to go to a local dealership and test drive something and take it home. And we want people who don't live in the cities to have those opportunities as well as those who do. So that's what brings me here today.
Great, thanks, Anna. Mark, how about you go next?
Yeah, so I'm Mark Peterson. I'm from New London, Minnesota. I own 2 electric vehicles, and I'm here to speak to those. A big part of it is that, or my reason for being here today is that I had to drive over 100 miles to get each of my electric vehicles. They simply aren't available out here, and even when I've approached dealers about bringing them in or giving an opportunity to test drive out here, there's just been absolutely no appetite from the dealers because they don't think there's a market for it. And I know they're wrong because I've talked to a number of people out here that just want access to these vehicles. The only time they have a chance to drive one is if they get to take a ride in mine, and that's not acceptable. I think Minnesotans want choice and we want access, and making sure that those dealerships bring these vehicles into our state so that we have the opportunity to test them and to take them home is a really important thing. So that's why I support the Clean Car Standards.
Great, thanks, Mark. And Dr. Baird, how about you take us home?
Well, my name is Mac Baird. I'm a retired family physician. I was previously the chair of family medicine at the University of Minnesota and the chairman of the board of UCare Minnesota. So I have a lot of experience with what healthcare costs and results are. I'm now living in Lake City, Minnesota, not far from Rochester. And I have the same experience of planning to buy an electric vehicle and finding the dearth of them around here and access to dealers. And so I've delayed it by a year. I hope it'll be soon enough. And I've seen the health impact of air pollution, especially in the metro area where those 5 counties have the majority of serious health effects of any kind of lung disease being exacerbated, asthma, chronic lung disease, and hypertension as well. And then anyone over 65 who accumulates such things or not overtly known to have them has an impact on their mortality as well as morbidity. So we see between 2,000 and 4,000 excess deaths due to air pollution. Then in southern Minnesota, there's a combination of factors of highly volatile hydrocarbons along with sunlight creating ozone locally near the ground. And in Rochester, there can be air inversions as well. So Rochester notably can have some pretty difficult air conditions for elderly and anyone with illness. And of course, it's a center of excellence for healthcare. So there are a lot of ill people there having difficult times during these air events. So there are many health reasons why we should support electric vehicles.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Baird. I want to open up the discussion today, I think, talking about something that kind of jumps out immediately when folks think about clean cars and what it's going to do for the environment, which is sort of climate change and climate pollution. Anna, you mentioned a little bit about transportation being the number one cause of air pollution in Minnesota. Do you want to say a little more about that and kind of what the effects of climate change you're seeing are and why we need to reduce that?
Sure. Well, there's the numbers from Minnesota overall, but I think what might surprise folks and what Dr. Baird was getting at is that Rochester itself, we did an energy action plan. We started it about 6 years ago and it was passed through the city council a couple of years ago. And in our inventory, transportation emissions account for 20% of the greenhouse gas problems in Rochester, which is a small town. We're not talking about long commutes. We're not talking about a whole lot of idling. We're not talking about some of the really serious congestion issues of larger cities. So if you imagine what that is when you take it, exponentially into the cities and other places, I think it would surprise people to know that even in, some of the smaller cities in Minnesota, there's a significant contribution. And obviously, as the doctor said, we have some interesting air quality issues here locally anyway. Some of the cities comprehensive plan work has revolved around some health assessment work, and asthma and heart conditions and things related directly to air pollution are high in the area. So that's, one of the things that we notice is going to be worse. It's only going to get worse. We don't have some of the other issues that folks have locally with power plants or things that are really large scale emitters here. But we do have agricultural contributions. And then, like we said, we have this sort of urban contribution. There are thousands and thousands of people who come to work at the clinic every day, and they commute as far as the city. So this isn't just our problem. It stretches, across certainly to the metro and beyond. And then the web, if you imagine, of Mayo Clinic's influence is all around the state. And so it's important to them as well. There's a group operating within the clinic that has done a lot of work around some of these health issues, and we've worked with them really closely. Like I said, with Conservation Minnesota, about 6-7 years ago, we surveyed a bunch of small communities, especially around southern Minnesota, but specifically here in Rochester, and we found consistently that 80 to 85% of those people who we surveyed did say that they are looking for clean energy. They care about it. They care about the implications. They care about it from a health standpoint, but also from just a viability and a life standpoint. So we are always paying attention to some of the contributing factors, but transportation has been a tricky one. The city has, last couple of years, a grant for a couple of electric buses, which we're very excited about. And you don't have to look very far to find articles that have happened since COVID about the reductions in greenhouse gas emissions just from fewer people commuting. So it's not really evasive data, it's out there. But we are hoping that as things tend to resume, and Rochester things have maintained in a way that maybe some other cities haven't, because we are a health clinic center during this time, we are still looking at that 20% as a number that we need to seriously chip into if we're going to accomplish our goals with this energy action plan.
Yeah, thank you. Any other comments on the climate change piece? I mean, I know in addition to just air pollution, I mean, Dr. Baird, as a medical person, what have you seen? Maybe not directly just respiratory illnesses, but just what are the health impacts of climate change that we should be aware of, and why is it important that we have a health conversation around this?
Well, thank you. There are many impacts that reach beyond respiratory disease. So infectious diseases that used to be in southern climates are moving up here. So insects, ticks, and other things that carry various illnesses are carrying more of them and a different kind of illnesses because of their zone that is expanding northward. We run into that. We have heat effect from people working outside especially. So contractors of all kinds and farmers and others have increased risk of heat effects, and people are sometimes underestimating that because we're used to being in a cooler climate. Now that we're not, this week being an example, but we just have longer duration and more severe heat indices than we used to have 2 decades ago and more. We also have more vigorous storms that are more frequent and more violent. And we have people and property damages, but also people injured by those. So the injuries are slowly mounting. That's not dramatic, but it does matter. And then the overall well-being is impacted by mental health. So what we're seeing in the younger people now, again, it's not just the current events of weather nature, but their overall gloom about how they see the climate change progressing, becoming more difficult for them to envision themselves and their next generation beyond them that's going to have a positive experience because of the climate warming. And this is new to them. This is not something that they used to think about. And now it's sometimes for young people, especially in isolation now with COVID, they can ruminate about this, and there's a higher experience of depression and anxiety and substance use. So the impact of all this is rising in many dimensions outside of cardiovascular disease and respiratory disease. And by the way, the health professionals for healthy climate includes nurses and physicians and public health people and all the schools of Health Science Center in the Twin Cities and in Rochester and Duluth that are engaged in this discussion because they want to have an impact. They want to do something. And relatively speaking, we need both individual actions that can add up, but also big public policy changes. So Clean Cars Initiative is one way to make an actual difference with our own energy contributing to it.
What I think, I want to jump in and combine something that Mac and Anna both hit on, Anna mentioned, I think 80 to 85% of people that want to be able to take action. And Mac talked about the concern with the lack of ability to impact things. And Clean Car Standards gives us an opportunity for individuals all across the state to make a really easy decision the next time they go to buy a car to actually have an impact, to be able to move that forward and to be able to take that action step that right now is really hard because the cars are not available.
And I would like to just follow up, like I'm on here to talk about like the possible creation of, new good jobs, but climate change also affects workers every day. Our coalition partners, NRDC, just put out a good study about climate change and health and safety. And I think right now we're thinking mostly about health and safety because of COVID, but just sort of like long-term effects of climate change affect workers that work outside. But also, my parents live in Red Wing and they have a farm. Actually, it's technically Hay Creek Township. The sort of warmer winter led to like this crazy snow, which led to this crazy flooding, and they couldn't get into the fields, in time. And that just has a big effect on economy. And so like I think that is also an important portion of, as we're thinking about how clean cars fits into sort of jobs in the economy as well.
Yeah, that's great, Bree. And maybe, this is a good time to kind of dig into that a little bit, because I think, the economy right now is under extreme duress. There's a lot of people are losing their work, and a lot of the people losing their work are hourly workers. I think we're certainly seeing an uneven recovery. And, when you look at the jobs that we're losing and that we could potentially gain, do you want to say a little more about the work of the Blue-Green Alliance on that front, and how you see clean cars might be able to help drive some economic growth and innovation?
Oh, for sure. And I think the example comes from the fuel economy standards, which isn't electric cars, but as we started like looking at figuring out how to regulate sort of emissions and things like that came out of cars, we found that because UAW workers and assembly workers, right, were the best at being able to make these cars. It was easier for sort of the American manufacturers to do a lot of that work here. And so it meant it stabilized American manufacturing here in the United States. And we see, if we do it right, clean cars as an opportunity to not only maintain American auto manufacturing, but expand it. And specifically, when we think through sort of supply chain as well, right? Like these cars are still going to need tires. They're still going to need brakes. And that's manufactured in different parts of the country, and especially here in Minnesota. And so if we think about how to, as we do this rulemaking and think about the policies that can come out of this rulemaking, and talk about Buy American and those sorts of policies, it really is an opportunity to create a robust and diverse manufacturing economy that Minnesota could use. And Minnesota's good at it, right? Like we have different pockets of manufacturing all over the state, and that builds out of industries like the farming industry. There's also farming manufacturing, right? So I think we have an opportunity to do that here and create good, high quality family sustaining jobs for people.
Can I jump on that from just another angle too? I serve on the University of Minnesota's Regional Sustainable Development Partnership for the Southeast, and also on the Clean Energy Resource Team Southeast Steering Committee. And what's interesting about electrification and providing electric charging stations is that a lot of smaller towns are after this, because what happens when someone has to wait for their car to charge somewhere is that they explore the local economy too. So some of these smaller towns that are hoping, especially the ones that are sort of off these major corridors, Highway 14 and 61 and 52, by getting charging stations put in, they are opening up a whole new sector of potential tourism, which is part of what the Sustainable Development Partnership looks at. So as we've talked about electric vehicles, some of these, I was at a presentation just a couple of days ago where Austin Public Utilities was talking about these sort of alliances that are being formed between small utilities, cooperatives, and municipal utilities to try to create infrastructure for charging stations faster, because that helps their local community and their local economies too. And they like it because that's all electric. That's all money going back to small cooperatives and municipal utilities. So yes, it's great if people are charging their cars at home. It's also great if people who don't live there pass through and charge their, their cars there. So that again is one of those ways that we can enhance what some of these smaller main streets look like over the years too.
That's a really great point. And Mark, I know you live in New London, I believe, and and I know that in the past, we've spoken, you've talked about some of the benefits of EVs for small towns in particular, and some of the economic benefits. I don't know if you want to expand on this topic a little bit that Anna's kind of opened up for us, but some of those thoughts might be interesting.
Yeah, New London is a shopping destination community right now, and I've been working with the city council and with their strapped budgets. It's been hard. We've got a couple of EV charging stations that have gone in at a local hotel that just got built, and we're looking to expand some of those opportunities to make sure that people can come to our community and explore and really celebrate what we have to offer and charge up their vehicle while they're here. And that infrastructure is really expanding. The MNPCA has done a wonderful job with the VW Dieselgate money to supply a lot of the level 3 charging that the state needs in order to make these cars really an option to travel across the entire state. And that infrastructure just keeps on rolling. I'm working with the local co-op here, Candio High Power Cooperative. They actually were the ones who paid to put in the charging stations at the new hotel. They're really excited about this. They know that this can help them flatten their demand curve. That it really does help because the pattern of charging fits so well with what the grid is set up to do right now, that this is just an all-around win for everybody if we can get these cars available and let people choose whether it's low emissions or zero emissions to make that choice.
Thanks, Mark. And, I think that economic angle is really important because, when you're looking at sort of where companies are looking to invest these days and where they want to go, and you look at some of the big companies like Best Buy and Target and XL, but also the little Main Street shops that Anna and Mark were mentioning, that capital wants to follow innovation. And I think, just me editorializing here for a moment, I think, clean cars really puts Minnesota in that, that cutting edge of innovative states that are really looking to make big strides forward and send a really strong message that, look, put your money here and we're going to do amazing things with it. We talked a little bit, shifting gears really quick, we talked a little bit about some of the health impacts of climate change earlier, but I don't want to lose sight of, the really specific respiratory illnesses and some of the negative outcomes that come from air pollution. And Dr. Baird, I wonder if you could say a little more about that and why it's so important that we keep cleaning our air and we keep making strides on that front.
Well, I'm happy to do so. So there are many respiratory illnesses, but the chronic ones that are common are asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and emphysema. And those are all aggravated by any kind of air pollution. It used to be, in fact, in the 70s, it was about particulate air pollution. So we had a lot of dust and grit coming from various large sources of output like power plants. And in fact, in 1970, when I was first in graduate education, I declined med school to go to study at University of Minnesota School of Public Health air pollution. And wanted my PhD to be the impact of air pollution on the weather, and I was not allowed to do that because they said I would never get a job. And so I went back to medicine. But right now, that's not the case. So we have much public support for this, but now it's not particulate as much as it is ozone if you're local, close to the ground in urban areas, and increased temperature as well as irritants that are hydrocarbons. So when those things mount up and are added to by local sources such as power plants, it really compounds asthma, particularly in young people. So they have more ER visits, more respiratory distress. It limits their physical activity. And then adults that have early chronic lung disease, it accelerates it. So they get worse faster, and then that accelerates the cardiovascular disease. So the lung and the heart work very closely together, and when you aggravate one, you often aggravate the other. So we are expecting, again, increased mortality from cardiovascular disease and lung disease over the next decades unless we do something to reduce this impact of air pollution. And that's not just climate, that's local air pollution as well as the rising temperatures.
Yeah, as an EV owner, you can see that really hyper local impact every winter morning when I preheat my car sitting in the garage with the garage door closed because there are no emissions. You know, we used to back the car out 2 feet out of the door so we could still have the kids in the garage getting in, but man, it filled up with the exhaust from the car and it stank and it was nasty. And you know, that on a higher scale is what we're trying to avoid by letting people make these choices. And for an individual person, you can see it in that super hyper local where it gets really concentrated in your garage in the morning in the winter, and I don't have to worry about it anymore. And it's really nice.
You know, we mentioned from several of us the impact of having something you can do. There has to be some action step, or we just become mired in inaction and despair. And that's true for any topic. If it's a miserable topic and you can't impact it, it's normal to spiral downward. And that's dangerous, especially for young people. If they get a pessimistic attitude about their future 10, 20, 30 years ahead, they stop initiating their own options and become a sort of learned helplessness attitude problem. So it's important to have something you can do. There are relatively few options that are this impactful. So by moving ahead with this legislation potential to impact on cars and how we can improve the environment is a major thing for people to know they can take action individually that contributes to the public welfare. And that's not trivial. It's very important.
Just jumping off that, we have a local Earth Fest celebration it would have been its 7th year this year, if we've been able to hold it. But the first year we tried to get dealerships to bring electric and hybrid vehicles to display, and we were only able to get 4, I think, of all the dealerships in the Rochester area, and most of those were hybrid. And then a couple of years later, it was, the market must have shown that it made sense for Tesla to co-sponsor our event or be one of our sponsors. So I think as people are looking at this and they're saying, you know, it's government pushing something on me, it's going to, you know, we're following California, we're quickly moving down that pathway of less choice. The market is indicating that this is where people want to go. And so I think the timing here is really great. And that's one of the things that we talk about to folks. I don't think I'd seen a Tesla in town when I moved here 7 years ago. And now there are multiple banks of chargers set up at different grocery stores around town. And that's, you know, there's Tesla specific, and then there's just general, you know, charging infrastructure popping up all over the place. And so when you start asking people to, you know, to think that way and say, you know, how many did you see before? Had you ever seen a Nissan Leaf? Did you know, and just a few short years ago, that wasn't the case. So if you imagine how rapidly the popularity is growing, you know, we're almost behind it before we can get ahead of it. And that's it's a really good strategy, or it has been so far, for talking to people about this initiative, that this isn't, you know, the state taking the industry anywhere. It's the other way around. It's the state responding to where the industry would like to be in our state.
You know, I want to comment on the product issue about this public health initiative, that we could frame this as a public health initiative. Around the year 2000, I was on a committee at the Institute of Medicine, then called that, where we had a report that we had to develop to update one on public health impact of all kinds of things. So we wanted to do what initiatives could impact the public health. And in the US, we learned from 3 years of work of research that unless there's a product behind a public health initiative, we have never succeeded to impact public health in this country. If there's a product, it could be a vaccine, but it could be tennis shoes or something, or in this case, electric cars. But if there's a product to go along with whatever that initiative is, we've succeeded. When there's not a product to go with it, we have never succeeded. Eat better. Well, it's been 50 years we've known what we should be eating and not eating, and it has had very little impact until products came along that somehow combined with that. And so this is a wonderful place where we could have an impact through both public health messages, but also products that support the same direction.
And I think that's a really good place to also mention, you know, Anna talked about how difficult it was to get dealerships to show up and bring their vehicles. But there's a Minnesota electric vehicle owners group on Facebook. And if you put out a request on there, you'll probably get 24 people offering to show up and just talk about their cars, because they're so much fun to drive. It's such a big impact. I will not buy another gas car. I'll limp these around. If they stop making electric vehicles tomorrow, I will limp these along for another 50 years if I have to. Not having to stand outside and pump gas, the instant acceleration, being able to heat my car up in the garage. These are just wonderful products. And like Max said, having that product behind this is really important. And getting us access to these vehicles out here will make a huge difference for that.
I think I just want to say, like, opening up sort of like product and thinking about like having a product for public health. You know, American manufacturers are the ones that like Ford and GM and ones that are, you know, unionized workers in them. One, have unionized workers that care a lot about their community and want to see just sort of a healthy community as well. And so they are actively thinking about how they can help those companies innovate to be sort of the next level of products. But also, these are the companies that start to make these models affordable for people. You know, Teslas are pretty to look at, but they aren't necessarily affordable for, well, me. You know, I think like thinking about like having more markets means that, like, you know, the car manufacturers that are good at making affordable cars that are reliable and still kind of cool will be able to be in this market. And I think that that's important to think through. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point, that if there's not an electric vehicle that works for you right now, you don't have to buy one, even if these standards come out. But these standards are going to help drive the market to create a vehicle that does work for you. That the Tesla's even talking about coming out with a subcompact now that'll be a $20,000 starting price eventually. And when you add in total cost of ownership, how much cheaper they are to drive, how much less fuel cost there is, how much less maintenance there is for these vehicles, that dollar to dollar comparison gets really easy really fast. My brother, because of how much he drives, could probably switch to an EV and have it cost him zero, because his fuel cost savings would completely offset whatever car payment he had. But there's not access to a vehicle that works for his use case yet. And that's the thing we need to change.
Well, and just thinking about, you know, the area that we're talking about, right? Like Ford has announced that they're going to be doing an all-electric Ford F-150. So if there's anything in my mind that signals sort of where people and what people want, right? It's an all-electric Ford F-150. So I know we have a regular Ford F-150 in my driveway right now. And so hopefully when we're looking for the next one, we will have the opportunity to buy a Union American all-electric Ford F-150.
It's
So it's
funny.
all-
I was
oh,
test
yeah,
driving.
please,
Oh, I'm
Anna.
sorry. I was test driving. I bought a Ford hybrid a couple of years ago, and when I was test driving, I asked why they were trying to clear the lot, and they said because we're going all electric and hybrid. Like we don't want any of the stuff on the lot anymore. And then the mayor here in Rochester, Kim Norton, she drives a Bolt and a Volt, and she had to leave the state to buy both of them. But these are great Chevy electric cars, and she just lamented over and over the fact that she couldn't buy it here in town, you know, and then slap her stuff on it and drive it all over. But now that's, you know, that's the frustration that we want to end, is not having access, like Bree said, to the affordable, great models that people would like to have. You know?
Yeah, I bought my Nissan Leaf for about $9,000. And the only reason I was able to do that was because it's a 2013. But those used 2013 Nissan Leafs don't exist in Minnesota. I had to go to a special dealer who specializes in buying lease return electric vehicles from ZEV states and transporting them to Minnesota. So my car was originally titled in Arizona, and only because this one dealer had committed to bringing these vehicles into the state because he's passionate about it, did I have the opportunity to buy one in this state.
So this is like my favorite panel to moderate, is when you anticipate all my questions before I can even ask them, and you just like go down that road, which is fantastic. But I want to explore something maybe a little more explicitly that I think you were all really kind of talked around, though, which is sort of the pace of innovation in the electric vehicle space right now. I mean, I think you know, we're seeing, as Bree mentioned, you know, an electric F-150 coming out. There's an electric Hummer that's on the way to come out. You know, what have you, especially those of you who have electric vehicles and have really watched this space closely, what have you seen over the last, you know, 5-10 years to where we are now when it comes to the sort of the pace of innovation around electric vehicles?
I guess I'll jump in here. Battery tech is what's really changing. That the batteries are getting cheaper and cheaper every year. These cars are going to be cost competitive with a gas car at the point of sale, and with the total cost of ownership equation, it's going to be a no-brainer. We're a sewing machine a moment away from the battery tech just advancing leaps and bounds and getting us up to an affordable car with a long enough range that you just don't have to worry about charging. I've owned my Leaf for 3 years now. I've used a quick charge exactly once, and it was the day I bought the car, because I bought a car that worked for my use case. That doesn't work if I have to drive further. And if you can get a 400 mile range car for an affordable price, you don't have to worry about charging, because you're going to have to stop to pee more than every 300 or 400 miles on whatever trip you're taking. By the time you come back out, your car's going to be ready to go and get you that next bathroom break on your drive.
So I wanted to, you mentioned sort of the amount of miles you get, and folks have talked about, not having to pump gas at the pump. I mean, one thing we haven't really talked about is kind of the cost for the consumer over time. And I was wondering if any of you have any comments on, is it cheaper to have an electric car? Is it more expensive? I mean, how do the economics work out for you folks personally who have them?
Way, way, way cheaper. So the cost of electricity is just substantially less than the cost of gas, even with the COVID prices coming down for gasoline. My cost per mile is like 3 cents per mile. Some of the best cars on the market are going to be closer to 12, 15 cents a mile. If you're talking about an SUV or a pickup truck, you're at 20, 25 cents a mile. And that adds up really, really fast. As far as charging infrastructure, I do 98% of my charging probably at home overnight. It doesn't matter how long it takes to charge. I bought cars that have ranges that accommodate the driving that I need to do. I get home, I take 2 seconds to plug it in, I go in, I wake up the next morning to a full tank. And the charging infrastructure is coming along that on the few occasions when I do have to drive beyond the range of the car, there's a charging station available. I have to plan a little bit for it, and that brings the cost back up a little bit closer to gasoline costs. But again, that's for 2% of my energy needs, and the savings I make on the rest just absolutely swamps any excess costs in that charging and having to plan or pick a hotel that has a charger so that's where I can charge overnight or things like that.
The things I hear all the time from EV owners, and you would probably, is the difference in not having maintenance, stuff like oil changes and things like that, that it's just what that adds up to over the years, especially if you're a person who drives a lot. And then one of the things that we've heard about here a lot, and I don't own one obviously, but the cost is only going to get better as we understand a little bit better the time of day use stuff that happens with our electrical grid. So EVs are actually pushing smaller utilities to get on smart metering faster and time of day pricing faster, things that they can do that really do make a difference for all consumers and generally our carbon footprint and output. So just having enough people in the market who are looking to charge their EVs is pushing utilities to move their technology forward faster, and that helps everybody make smarter decisions. So they're actually, EV owners are actually having a positive effect on non-EV owners too. So that's pretty exciting. And again, one of the things we use as a motivating point when we're talking to people who may not be interested in buying one yet, but they're thinking about it and generally understanding what it's doing for our economy.
So as I'm hearing us discuss this from car owners' perspective, or me as a physician, or others that are deeply involved in this, and employers as well, we have an idea here for Clean Cars Initiative that has economic benefits, job benefits, environmental benefits, health benefits, morale benefits. It's hard to find a topic or an initiative that hits that many positive notes. In fact, I can't think of many. I know change is difficult for any culture, including ours, but this one is going to accelerate quickly. So my concern is to get rid of my existing gas vehicle before the collapse of the market for such things. Now that'll cause an interesting secondary market, but this is going to change quickly. I think it's not too far away when Minnesota will be behind the curve competing for people who want to live someplace where they can drive an electric car without worrying about it.
Yeah, that is a really excellent point, Doctor. And I actually want to come back to you real quick too on another question, because my background is in healthcare, and so, in listening, you sort of tick off all of the issues that we have associated with climate change, associated with air pollution, and those pieces. I always think of kind of this total cost of care. Like what is, all the money that we as a society are putting into our healthcare system. It seems to me if we can reduce some of the pressures there, that will save money for the entire system. And I know that's a little bit of a tangent, but I just wonder if you had any thoughts on that as a physician, in terms of, what the overall system benefits might be to really, healthcare system benefits might be to really tackling climate change, head on.
Well, it's like a number of other, thank you. It's like another list of things that we could do that are proactive, that don't have an immediate impact on healthcare costs, but in 1, 2, and 10 and 20 years have a big impact of reducing the disease burden. So we can reduce healthcare costs in a number of ways. Paying less per unit of care is one way, et cetera, and taking out the administrative overhead, which we're always trying to do. But I've been involved in healthcare since I was a resident in the 1970s, and then in administration for 30 years, including the director of a health plan. And one of the dilemmas is unless we start reducing the disease burden, we're going to become better and better at rescue care at the end of life or near the end of life. And it'll be very profitable for those of us who provide those services, but devastating for the rest of the public. So we'd like to get in a different situation. And one of those things that's the biggest health risk for the world, let alone the US, let alone Minnesota, is climate change. WHO has stated that, the World Health Conference on Climate Change has stated it. I believe presidential candidate or two has stated the biggest health risk long-term for university or for US is climate change. It'll swamp what used to be our biggest risk was obesity. Well, this will aggravate that. It'll aggravate every other illness we have. And unless we do something concrete, both individually and collectively, to impact climate change, we will continue to accelerate the cost of care. And eventually, there are consequences to that. Not only running out of money, we continue to segment care so those that can afford to get more sophisticated rescue care. And we don't spend enough money on everything from climate to housing. And so we medicalize these illnesses and treat it at the end of the interaction. That's very expensive. If you do it earlier, it's like education. It's cheaper to educate somebody than to rescue them. And it's the same for climate. We would be so much better off 20 and 30 and 100 years from now by impacting this now. And as we all know, time is running short. So I couldn't get more excited about a topic than climate change.
Thank you. And we're getting close to the end of the hour. And so I want to just do 2 quick questions to wrap up, and then give you folks the floor to finish off the panel. First off, though, I want to just ask Anna real quick. You're in Rochester, and I know that Rochester's been involved in a lot of really innovative approaches to accelerating EV usage, but also just in energy use in general. Do you want to say a few words about what's going on in Rochester?
Sure. I said earlier that when I started with Conservation Minnesota 7 years ago, almost, or I'm in my 7th year, we had done some surveys of smaller communities that were members of the Southern Minnesota Municipal Power Agency, and that includes Austin and St. Peter, Owatonna, and Rochester. Anyway, and what we were trying to get at was what public sentiment was around climate change, around clean energy, things like that. And at the time, my first job with the organization was to bring the results of those surveys to city councils and utility boards. And to say that it was a friendly response would not be accurate. I won't go so far as to say it was hostile, but it wasn't welcomed yet. But what's been really amazing to see in 6 short years, especially here in Rochester, is that 80 to 85% support that we showed for clean energy has turned into citywide policy in a very short amount of time. If you imagine, 6 years in municipal government is usually, it's a blink, but this has been remarkable. So we started out, like I said, in this heavily fossil fuel laden contract situation. Nothing could be done till 2030. Let's not even talk about it. To having the city adopt an energy action plan, hire sustainability staff and an entire department to head that up, the municipal utility just this last year declared that they will be looking at 100% renewable option going forward. So they're looking at 50% by 2030 and then 100% by 2050. So right now they're in the process of reevaluating their own ability to generate, looking at other partnerships, and transitioning away from coal and fossil fuels. And then obviously we see things like Great River Energy, changing, closing down. These are natural, responses to some of the market and what's happening. But what is really great to see is that we have the clinic coming in heavily for the health side of this. And then we have a city that is trying to recruit people from all over the world to come and live here. And to do that, we need to have the kind of city that is attractive to, as the doctor said, younger people who are looking at climate change as going to be the defining thing of their lifetimes. We need to be able to say as a community that we are addressing it, and that this is going to be a good place to live, regardless of what kind of happens. And so at this point, the utility is looking at two different options. One is an entirely fossil fuel free plan. The other is a net zero plan. But regardless, we're going to be looking at a lot more charging infrastructure. Like I said, a lot more technology advancements for time of day usage and things that previously the utility had deemed too expensive to do because we were talking about millions, $30 million or more to transition all the homes to smart meters and things. But now if you look at that as a long-term investment, that is a drop in the bucket compared to the price of not doing it. So we're pretty excited. Like the Energy Action Plan that the Energy Commission helped put together stalled for a little while, and we weren't sure if we were going to move forward on it, but then a lot of things sort of broke in the last couple of years. And now with the leadership with our mayor and a really proactive council, the utility doing great work as the largest municipal utility in the state. They are the first municipal utility, as far as we know, in the country to declare at 100% renewable goal. So we're pretty proud of the work that we've helped to do here with Conservation Minnesota, and certainly I've been happy to be a resident and on the citizen side of it too. So all of this will hopefully make Rochester the magnet internationally that we hope to continue to be.
Great, thank you, Anna. And then just kind of almost a lightning round, but we'll just, I just want to know if you could pick one, and this is for all the panelists, if one sort of EV myth to dispel, whether it's they don't work in the cold, whether it's, you can't drive more than 2 miles from your house, whether it's, whatever it is, what would it be? And Mark, I know that you've driven quite a bit of these, so you may have opinions on this. So I'm going to throw it to you first.
Sure. I think that they all boil down to you get over range anxiety real quick. When I first got the car, I was always nervous. I always had backup plans. I always figured out exactly what 3 charging stations do I have as options on this. And pretty soon you start to learn to understand the car and you understand where the infrastructure is. And I haven't worried about that really at all in a year and a half now. You start to really figure this out as the infrastructure comes along. It's just not an issue. Charging doesn't take that long and the times that you're going to be doing it, because usually you're driving somewhere that you can just plan to stop wherever there's a charger, and that's where you stop. And it's really not as big of a concern as people make it out to be, because they've never experienced it, and it's a fundamentally different thing. I explained this on a road trip for somebody I was trying to explain it to. Instead of stopping to when you need to pee and refueling, you stop when you need to refuel and you pee while you're there. And so just that change of mindset of, it's a little bit of work to get started on it, but once you do, it really is easy, and the range anxiety just sort of evaporates over time as you get comfortable with it.
Bree, you're next.
I don't know if it's a myth, but I like to think that when new opportunities present themselves, if we come together as a community and think about how we want that to look in our state, it means, and if we want to make sure that workers are at the table as they think through how we transition to this option of clean cars, then we can create policy that has ripple effects for everyone. And I think mostly about, as we think through sort of like, we want this, which means we want cars, but also we want it to create jobs. So what are the exciting policies that can come out of the rulemaking? Does that mean Buy American? Does that mean supporting an American-made supply chain? Does that mean local hire for the manufacturing that exists here? And I think it's about like switching your mindset from this is something that's going to take away to like, how do we create this in a way where we're building for the future and building for the jobs of the future? And so I guess that's the way I'm hoping that we can all work as a community to think about how we're creating the jobs for the future here.
Oh, oops.
Yeah, so the one
yeah,
of the,
sorry.
oh, sorry, I didn't know I've done.
Go ahead, please.
Sorry, the one I hear all the time is that what if I forget to charge it and I have to go somewhere and I can't go anywhere because I forgot to plug it in? And I would just say, you know, it's one of those things where it takes human behavior, it's 21 days to make or break a habit. And I guarantee that there have been times that we've all left the house and thought, shoot, I'm going to have to stop and get gas, you know, but there are also so many more times that we thought, I'm going to have to leave 5 minutes early tomorrow morning to get gas. And so that is, you know, it's a consciousness switch a little bit, but guaranteeing that some of those price indicators on your bill and things like the habits will kick in quickly, and then you know, the reward for that is going to be well worth the remembering. But again, we are committed with Conservation Minnesota to promoting this statewide. We think that there's just as much opportunity for greater Minnesota in this as there is for the metro, and achieving some of that equity is really important. It's important for the environment, but it's also just important for our state's economy, which we're always looking at. Healthy economy means healthy people, which means people are taking care of themselves and they're taking care of our environment, and all that's good.
Thank you. And Doc, you want to finish up for us?
The thing I hear is it wouldn't make any net change in climate change, and actually it does. And not only during the use of the car, because you're not emitting things, but the oil used currently for maintenance of a vehicle, oil changes and lubrication, et cetera, is less. The power industry is shifting to renewable sources, so that's going to have an impact. That takes longer, but it's happening. So the net impact is both near term of reducing output of carbons and things that produce warming and air pollution, but also the longer term impact is going to be very positive. Cars produce about 24% of our warming impact on air pollution. And so we can impact that right away with use of no emission and reduced emission vehicles.
Great, thank you. And you know, we're getting close to the hour, but I want to make sure that everyone has a chance to finish up and make sure that you said what you wanted to say. Would anyone like to make any final remarks before we finish up today?
I'll go ahead and just add, we've talked about a whole lot of reasons why this is good for the state as a whole. We've talked about jobs, we've talked about climate, we've talked about health impacts of pollution. Even if you want to ignore all of those things, and that's a lot of things to ignore, these are still good vehicles that are really nice for people to drive. And there's a market for these vehicles, even among people who don't believe in climate change, who think that the long tailpipe myth is a reality and all they're doing is shifting their pollution to a power plant. They're still good cars to drive, and these standards are still going to benefit you. Even if you don't choose to buy them, if 8% of new vehicle sales are electric vehicles, gas prices are going to stay low because there's less demand on the gas pumps, and you're still going to benefit. This is a net benefit all around. It's a win-win-win-win-win, and there's very little reason to oppose these standards.
Okay, that's great. I think that's a suitable finale for all of us. I want to thank all of my panelists for joining me today for this great discussion. Thank you so much, and we look forward to talking to you again sometime.
Thanks you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.